I started to write a note to, in response to Victor's post about the turmoil and brutality on the part of police officers, and then the protests in response to that. I started to write a response post to Victor, but I thought, no, I think I'd prefer just to sit and talk to you a little bit about what's going on. My own experience with the racial inequality and injustice in our country began in my growing up years in southeastern Oklahoma. I was in grade school when the Supreme Court decision came down to integrate schools. In our little town, they didn't get around to shutting down the black uh, middle and high school until I was in middle school. And I remember when they brought those two schools together, and I was kind of excited because my first African American friend's name was Oscar Black. I thought that was kind of neat. Um, in my own family, my parents had a real sense of racial equality about them. They um, they weren't on any kind of crusade or whatever. My dad, when I was in the latter years of middle school and perhaps even maybe the first year of high school, my dad invited a black Nazarene pastor to preach in our church on a Sunday evening. And I remember that it caused a little stir among a family or two. I remember one lady saying that he ought to be over there with his own kind. And I didn't know how to take that. It bothered me extremely. The fact that when I was way back in I think elementary school, at the little train station in our town, there weren't a lot of passenger trains that came through. Only one occasion at that point in time. But I remember going to the train station. I think they were taking our class to the state fair or something, and there was a water fountain marked for whites only. I didn't know what to do with that. And really, as I grew up and over the years, I, I had this sense of guilt that I didn't do more, that I didn't yell louder, that I didn't get up on a soapbox, that somehow I should have done more, even as a young person, and certainly then as a young minister, that somehow I should have spoken out. I had this sense of guilt in me. And then uh, maybe 10 years or so ago, my wife were attending at that time a inner city ministry church here in Oklahoma City. It was about church is about 30, maybe 40% African American. There's a Hispanic family or two, and there has been in past an Asian family, occasional Asian family. I remember one Sunday morning as we arrived at church. An African American guy named John arrived almost at the same time. We were walking in together. John had battled drug abuse and had been homeless for a while and was struggling to get his life back together. And as we walked into the church that Sunday morning, he said to me, "How's my brother this morning?" It was the first time I think that an, someone of African ancestry had had initiated calling me brother. It it emotionally wrecked me that morning. I sat in Sunday school. I was an emotional mess. I wept through there, through Sunday school, and even through part of church. But it was as though John had forgiven me on behalf of his entire ethnic background, and there was a sense of liberation in my heart that was brought to me by how an African American had treated me. I don't know what it's like to be looked at, to know that you are viewed differently from the rest of people in society simply because of skin color. I had a couple of incidences in Europe, but they weren't everyday things. There was one time when a gasoline station attendant refused to gas up my car because he heard my American accent and he didn't like Americans. But that was just one incident. And one or two others down the road along the way in life where, because I was an American and living in another country, I was refused service. But those were isolated. I have not lived with the everyday experience that Victor and others have. I hope we'll pray for our country in these days, not simply that peace will come, but that justice will come, that good, born again, spirit filled believers will quit sitting on the sidelines and begin to speak up loudly in all the ways that are possible for them. Um, if not, then we aren't being the salt that we ought to be in our society. And goodness, with the high percentage of people who profess to be born again Christians in this country, I mean, this ought to be a very salty piece of bread or cake, and unfortunately, it's not. It's kind of sour at the moment. Well, as I say, I thought about sitting down and writing all that to you, but I thought it might maybe take me too long to compose and maybe longer for you to read and get it said correctly and all of that. I wanted to speak from my heart. And Victor, I wish you were here. We'd give you a hug even in COVID-19 days. We haven't walked the path that you've walked, but we certainly want to walk with you in these days as all of us try to figure out what it means to be God's holy people in situations that are very, very unholy.